Good evening. My name's Charlie Hockenson. I've been a member of the Ocean Woodturners for probably 7 or 8 years. What we're going to do tonight is lattice turning. And this is an article that I had found several years ago in the Woodturning Design Magazine. The author of the article is David Springett. So I want to make sure that he gets his just due. This is actually his design. And what we do is I've made several boxes, and the boxes have a lattice type design. On one side is concentric circles, and on the other side there's 3 sets of concentric circles. So if I can put that right there, if you can see that. And I just made a fold in. These 2 boxes here I've made several years ago. This one's out of spalted. The tops are made out of black walnut. This box here, what I just made I made this. You got it back? Is it? Yeah, that was weird. Okay.
Let me see if I can't get these. Somebody was asking about these wigs. There you go.
Okay.
Which one you at, Rick? This one, I can't see it. Yep. We were looking for a close-up of wigs, and I think that should give them what they look.
Okay. And this is my recent one. I just made this week, and again, like I said, I'm not sure what kind of wood this is, but it was a tree the city cut down in Pawtucket, and I swiped the logs off the sidewalk before the city could get back to get them. And the lid I made on this one is a little bit different. It's like a dish, and I've inserted the lattice rings inside the disc. So basically, to get started, I've got instructions, and we're gonna put these on the club website for anybody that's interested in making this. So basically, got 2 pieces of wood glued together. They're about a little over 3-inch square, 3 1/8 inch square, and I found the center on this piece of wood. 2 circles that you need to draw on the wood. One is the outside circle that's 3 inches, and then based on that center that I just made. And what I end up with, there's some things that I learned by trial and tribulation here. Being centered is the utmost importance on this whole thing. We're going to build this. We're going to do this on a faceplate, and I'm going to mount it with some screws. There's 3 sets of holes that you have to.
We can see that right where you were.
Okay.
Right there. Yep.
There's 3 sets of holes on here. On the light colored wood on the back, the way I did it, the center hole, we're going to make a number of concentric rings on here. And the other side, we're going to have 3 sets of concentric rings. Now, in order to have those 3 sets, we're going to turn it on an off center. So this will be the center for the concentric rings on that side, and this will be the center for the concentric rings on the light colored wood side. the important thing is when we make this, like I said, everything being centered is very important. So the 3 holes that I drilled here for the concentric rings on this side, I want those to be in one of the grooves of the rings that I put on this side. So what I do is I make sure that I do that when it's on the lathe. Once I found the center of the piece of wood, I'm just going to mount that here on the lathe. The other important thing with this, the pieces of wood that you use, are that they're flat.
Charlie, are the holes, the 3 holes, are they the same on the lighter and the darker, or are they different on the back side, the 3 holes? Are they drilled all the way through?
The holes are drilled all the way through,
Okay.
and the holes are drilled all the way through, and I'm using, to hold this on the lathe, I'm using a number 4 pan head screw to hold that on there so I can make my concentric rings. To find out where those rings are going to be on here, if you take, like I said, I found the center ring here. Now if you take the center and you find the radius of that 3-inch circle right here, you're going to make another circle at 1 1/8 inches. The radius is going to be 1 1/8 inches right here. And if you take that center and you draw a circle around here, you get another circle inside the 3-inch circle that's 2 1/4 inch diameter. Now if you put your compass on any point on this circle right here, and you make a mark right here, and you make a mark right here, and you follow that around, and you end up with 6 marks on that 2 1/4 inch circle. And then you drill a hole, so 3 of those marks you're going to use to find the location of these 3 holes so that they're equidistant around that 2 1/4 inch circle. In this case here, I've already drilled these 3 holes here. The one put on the lathe right here, I've drilled those. The important thing is that you make, when you mark where you're going to be making your concentric circles on here, that you make, that you're going to turn right here, that you want that to be, the hole for the center of that has to be in that groove. Otherwise, you'll end up with a hole somewhere in the middle of your lattice, and it's not going to look very nice. So, next big step is the next big step here is going to be to figure out where you're going to put the how you're going to space out the concentric circles across here. And there's going to be probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's going to be 6 or 7 of those concentric circles on here. So I tried several different methods of doing that. I took a steel rule and I actually bolted it to my tool rest. That seemed to work okay, but it was hard to read the steel rule when you're trying to put the tool into the thing. So after spending a couple of hours doing that, and it turned out to be not as good as I thought it was. Another point that I want to make before we get started here is that, and you'll see this in the instructions that are for the project, I made a a tool rest out of a flat bar or a piece of box tubing, square tubing. And when you, to make this, you're cutting 1/16 of an inch grooves in here. And you want the tool to be absolutely flat on the bar, and you want to go straight into the work. You don't want to be turning it, you don't want to be up and down, it's got to be flat on the bar. Otherwise, you end up with this result, which is not good. When I made these a couple of years ago, the first tool that I made, I found a chisel in my scrap box, and I made the tool out of this little chisel. And it worked pretty good for a while, and every now and then I had trouble with it, and I couldn't figure out why. So for this demo, I decided to make a new chisel, and I took one of these old chisels that I had laying around. This was my dad's chisel, and I could sense that he was rolling over in his grave when I was grinding up his chisel. So I just ground it away, and I made the tip of the chisel 1/16 of an inch wide. And it's important to remember that I ground the back of the chisel.
Just zoom into the chisel, like, but if you put it on the face of the, there you go.
Okay, it's 1/16 of an inch wide, and if you look closely at it, I ground it back a little bit so that when I enter the groove of the hole, the bottom of the chisel is not going to interfere, because you're turning a very tight radius circle with it. So getting back to setting this up and trying to space out the holes, I came across a tool that I bought a couple of years ago for making not coves, but beads. So this is a 1/4 inch bead tool. And basically all I'm going to do here is I'm just using the tip of the tool to do my spacing with, and I'm just making a mark on it. So I'm going to start right at where those tool marks are. And I'm just going to go across here. So now I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grooves on here. So at this point, I can take my chisel and start making the grooves on the light colored side. Now this is kind of nifty about this particular setup, is that because you got 2 different color woods here, when you push the tool in, you know to stop when you start seeing the sawdust come out, or the wood chips come out of a dark colored wood. Otherwise, if you use a one colored piece of wood, you'd have to put a mark on your chisel to know the depth that you need to go. And the only thing I'm going to do here, because that piece of wood is not very straight, I'm going to put another screw in this on the outside edge and just get that flat down to the looks pretty good. I used to just use a washer on the end, on the very edge of that piece there. So now we can start cutting the holes, and I'm going to cut the center of the tool is going to be right on the lines that I just made here. The speed of the lathe, it's about 1200 RPM. And the important thing is, like I said before, you keep the tool flat on the surface and just push it very gently in. I just started to see the dark colored wood shavings coming out. Now I'm going to do the next one. When I'm doing this, my left hand is kind of pushing against my right hand to guide the tool, because you get soft spots in the wood, or you get, if you're a little too aggressive with it, you could push it in too far. The tool goes in very easy when it's sharp. And again, I'm trying to keep it very straight. That's pretty much it for the concentric circles on the outside, or this will end up being the bottom of the piece. Now the fun part comes in when we turn it around, and we're turning it off center. So we got 3 more rings, 3 more sets of rings to turn on the other side. You just want to take a look at it and make sure that you went all the way through to the dark colored wood. Because if you didn't, when you turn it around, you're not going to be able to see through the lattice. The first bunch of these things that I made, I was really just kind of eyeballing the distance between the rings. These here are pretty much dead on by using that tool to do that. So now we're going to put this screw right in the center. And this is going to be our new center. An important thing on this, when we do these concentric rings right here, I can't remember which way to get the camera right here. Okay. So if you'll notice, the center hole for this set of rings right here, we make the first groove right here, and then the next groove, I want the edge of that groove to be right on the edge. That way, they're all equal. all the way around. So the center should be equal, but you want to make sure that you get the grooves in the exact same spot. So I did the same thing. I used the put another screw in here to get this thing down flat. What I found was that there's certain types of wood that works really good with these things, and then other types not so good. I glued up a half a dozen or more of these pieces of wood, and when you glue up the halves, you end up with two types of wood, and you glue up the halves, alternate the grain so that you got the grain of one piece of wood perpendicular to the grain of the other piece of wood. And you would think that would keep them flat. And after I took them out of the clamps and I let them set a couple of days, I had wood that you could build boats with, because one of them warped and it actually bent the other piece with it. So I changed the type of wood. So I got a piece of maple on the light colored side and black walnut on this side. And these here stayed relatively flat. But my recommendation would be, if you're going to do these, glue up the pieces, and then as soon as the glue is dry, do the project. Don't give them a chance to warp. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to make my first groove on these here, and I'm going to make it about halfway between the center and the edge of this piece of wood. And there's my light colored wood. And I can actually see the rings. I can see the light colored wood going through there. Now my next ring is going to be right on the edge of that one. And you can see on my tool the light colored wood pieces coming out, so you know you've gone far enough. So now what I want to do here is I'm going to use my beading tool to space the rest of the rings on here.
Charlie, other than making your own tool, your opinion? No, in other words, if you didn't have the luxury to make that, what's another tool? Is there another tool that you could?
I honestly don't know. There may be a detail turning tool you can, but I think everybody's got some old tools laying around. You know, you got an old bench chisel. I prefer one a little bit longer, and maybe a half an hour on the grinder. You know, and I just ground it down, and I used some calipers, and when I got to a 1/16 of an inch, and I ground it round on the bottom, because when you're in the tight radius right here, you don't want the tool catching as it's going around. And that's what I found on this one, is just square across. And so I was experimenting. And I also tapered the grind, so the top of the cutting edge of the tool is wider than the bottom of the cutting edge. Not by a lot, but enough to give the saw kerf. It's like putting a set in a saw. You know, you get a crosscut saw, and you'll see the teeth are out. The cutting edge of the teeth are wider than the saw blade itself, because you don't want that getting caught in there. So this one seems to be working really good. So this one's going to be a keeper. This one here, I'm not sure what I'll do with that. So that completes that right there. And again, you can see the concentric rings, and we do that 2 more times on here. So the faceplate that I make, that I'm using here, I've had this thing for years, and it gets totally destroyed when you start putting a lot of holes in it, and kind of makes a mess out of it. So after a while, I'll take it and I'll just turn it down, turn it flat again, and then when that piece of plywood is used up, I just add another piece of plywood onto it. So I got 3 pieces of plywood on here now. So now we just set up the next one. You probably spend more time screwing around literally than you do the actual turning part of it. I like having the holes. I think I used I wrote it down in here. The holes I used, these are number 4 panhead screws, and the holes was 7/64 drill bit. And they're snug in the hole, which is exactly what you want. You don't want them So again, I'm going to cut the first hole about half the distance from the screw to the edge. Now, for some reason, my tool rest dropped down. You want the tool rest, the top of the tool, to be right on the center of that. Otherwise, you run into problems. use the beading tool to space out the next set of rings. And we do the next one. We're doing good.
They're almost touching each other. Did you plan on that?
Plan on what?
The rings, they're almost touching? The two separate sets.
No, I was hoping nobody had noticed that. I normally make the rings. Where am I here? Oh, this camera. Okay. I normally make the rings like about that far because it allows you to put a knob on the top.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, for the center of it. This one here, doing this a little faster than I normally do it.
So they're actually too close on the one that you're doing
Yeah,
now.
yeah. But in order to keep them all the same.
Right.
So take our, like anything in turning, there's no hard, fast rule. It's whatever makes you happy and what you're happy with when it's done. The first bunch that I made, instead of trying to make an effort to make them evenly spaced, I eyeballed it. Sometimes I got it. Sometimes I said, oh crap. So.
Well, one of the members, Matt, had wondered if maybe using a very thin parting tool, and he actually sent a link to it, but it's just a regular thin parting tool. So the important part would be the thickness, correct? The thickness of the tool?
Yeah, and I think, you know, as far as size goes, this size is what's in the instructions. That's the size that this fella made. There's no reason why you can't make any size you want.
Right.
You can make them as wide as you want. You can make as many rings as you want. You know, you can experiment with it. There's whatever, this size here fits these boxes perfectly.
So the bigger the box or the smaller the box, you change.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'd go much smaller than that for a cover for anything, but that's what we have. I like these number 4 screws. I've tried a bunch of different screws. The regular wood screws, I've got some of those, but they're not like a panhead screw. They don't have a flat space underneath the head, and they end up indenting the lid. There is a little bit of sanding and cleanup involved. When I'll get down cleaning this, we'll talk about that. The thing about using a parting tool, to me, would be
Standing it on the edge.
Yeah, you know, if you look at the edge of the tool, you don't want it much thicker than that. If the parting tool is, and then again, you want to round off that edge because you're sticking that into a very tight radius. And so you don't want the bottom piece of the cutting edge, the bottom of the tool, to be touching any of the sides. And like I said, that I've tapered that down. So it is kind of a custom tool. when you're doing this side here, you'd be real careful because you've already cut out wood from the other side of it on the light colored wood. When you start going in from the dark colored wood side, when you get to the end of it, it's going to have a tendency to push in because you're turning less wood. So you just got to keep your eye open for that. And again, it's imperative to keep the tool flat and straight into the turning. So now I'm going to mark my positions again here. That's not good. That's going to put me right into the other hole. We're going to have one less hole on this one. We're not even going to go there.
So is that due to the lineup of the 3 holes, or?
No, that's just due to me not paying attention to it and making them a little more than I should. I probably shouldn't have bothered putting that last groove in there. I should have stopped where it was. And I think it would have been fine. The next step in this, and I didn't bring anything with me to prepare for it, would be if you noticed that when I turn these, most of the turning is outside of the 3-inch circle. So you need to put it in something. And again, if you just take a piece of wood, and this one here is probably about 5/16. This disc is about 1/4 inch. It's 2 1/8 pieces of wood glued together. And so I made this thing here a little over 5/16 of an inch. And I just mounted a piece of wood on the faceplate. And I turned it. I turned the center first, and you keep turning it, and you just sneak up on it until you get it so that this piece here just fits inside that circle. And then the outside of the circle, once you've got the center part of it cut out, then the outside of the circle you cut to the size of the box that you're putting it in. That's pretty straightforward.
That's a ring, correct? You're making a ring.
This is a ring, correct. Now making the ring, you mount a larger piece. You mount, like if this is 3 inches, you mount a 4-inch piece of wood on here, and you can do it 2 ways. You know, you can screw it on there in the center. I think, and then try to turn it out, try to turn the ring until you get to the size that you want. And you got to sneak up on it. You want it tight, you want it close, but you don't want to force it in there. A little bit, yeah. And so it's an experiment. You're not going to make the first one right away. I've got some casualties in here. There's some things in here there that if you look here, the holes for the for the outside, the 3 concentric rings, sets of rings on the other side, the holes are not in the groove. So that's something that you don't want. And I found myself, when I was drilling these, I put it on the drill press. I find the center, and then I make the mark, the centers for the other ones. And I go over to the drill press and I drill the 3 holes. And invariably, the drill press, the bit moves just a touch, and then you end up with, instead of all being in the same circle, or the center circle that you made might not be the same as the center circle that you put on here. So it could be off. So what I got in the habit of doing is I make the first hole, I put it on the faceplate, and now that's going to establish where this turning right here is. Just use the tool and just make a little groove on there, and then put your mark, use your radius mark to lay out where those other 3 holes are going to be, and they'll be dead on. When you get it all finished, you're going to have to do a little piece of sandpaper, go in there. There's going to be little fuzzy pieces of wood that you didn't cut out. You're going to go in there and clean those up. A little sanding to take some tool marks out of it if there are any. And that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's any other questions that folks have.
I'm gonna turn my volume on. And, So, I've got my microphone up so Charlie can hear you guys. And I know we did have a question from Matt in regards to, so the question is, the D-Way parting tool was .080 wide, or about a 16th. How wide is the cutting edge on the one that you?
The cutting edge is a 1/16 of an inch.
It is a 16th. Okay, does that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, it does. I think the thin parting tool's got an aggressive enough angle to it that it could probably be used about as effectively as the tool that you've got. I'm going to give it a shot.
But I wonder, when you're looking at that, are you thinking of laying it flat or standing it on edge, I guess?
I would be on edge.
Yeah. So I think that's.
I think that's where you're going to have to be careful. One of the advantages of this is that this tool is about a 1/2 inch wide of surface, and I'm laying it flat on the tool rest. And you need to, so you got to be careful. If you put a tool up on its edge, you got to be careful that it doesn't roll on you, because I guarantee you'll tear out that ring that you're trying to make. Yeah.
The price is perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, these beading tools that I got these from D-Way. And these are pretty nice tools.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? You just have to unmute yourself.
How large of these have you managed to cut?
Can you repeat that question?
How large a diameter of a piece have you managed to do?
I've only done these here, which are, the outside diameter of this is 3 inches. The diameter of the 3 concentrics, the 3 sets of circles on the dark side of the wood, that's 1 1/8 inches. I think it's 1 1/8. Oh, the diameter, yeah, that's, the radius is 1 1/8. So it's 2 1/4 inch circle around there, diameter. One of the things that I did do on, I was experimenting, I haven't done it for an actual project, but I actually used my beading tool. When I got all the rings made, I took my beading tool and I rounded them off. So it makes it a little clearer to see the lattice work in there because you've got the edges rounded off. This side here came out much better.
Why did you switch from the chisel to the beading tool when you started making the grooves, the partial grooves?
I was just establishing where I was trying to do this on the edge of the, trying to get this lined up here. So I wanted the outside diameter of that groove, that circle right there, to be right on the edge. So I just eyeball that because I was just trying to get halfway between the center where the screw was, holding it to the faceplate, and this outside edge. And then the next one I put right on the outside edge. From there, I used the beading tool to establish where the other circles were going to be. What's that?
Why didn't you continue to use the chisel?
Because then I wouldn't get them all exactly the same distance apart.
Understanding the point of the beading.
The beading tool is only used for establishing the distance between the rings. I wanted a consistent distance between all the rings, and the beading tool helped me do that. I just put a mark on the wood with the beading tool. I'm not actually cutting into anything. Once I've got the mark on there, then I use the chisel to actually make the groove. And what I was just talking about is that after you've got them all made, you can go back and use the beading tool and go around the edges and just smooth off all the edges and round off all the edges. And it kind of makes a nice effect. I'm still experimenting with that. I haven't used that for a cover on a box yet.
But it does make for a nice lid, very fancy or different than
Yeah.
everybody else's.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get a close-up of that or not to see. What I want to
Yeah.
see.
Put it right.
I know you can see it because it's sitting here, is you can actually see the lattice behind it. You know what I'm saying?
Mike, it looks like your video is frozen at this point for me.
Oh, it is. Here we go. Yeah. We need some better studio lighting. Yeah.
That gives you a really good idea, because now you can see the ring behind the
Yeah.
ring.
Yeah. And that's versus those are just the flat rings.
I'm curious if you've tried making any smaller than the 3 inches that could then be used as like medallions to go into other pieces.
It sounds like a challenge to me. Who was that? Chris? Yeah.
That was me, Chris.
Yeah. I'm going to challenge you to do that, Chris, in the next meeting.
This is giving me an idea for something.
Full of ideas.
Yeah.
So it's a little early, it's a little after 8, but that was a, good 45-minute demo, something that we haven't seen before. So we've got a little bit to take all this apart, and whatever. We can leave the Zoom meeting open, and if you guys want to chat amongst each other, or whatever. And if nobody has anything else to add, we'll let Charlie wrap up his end of the bargain. And then, again, we'll leave this rolling for anybody who wants to stick around.
Thanks for the close-up.
Do you normally put the lattice work from the top to the lid or from underneath to the lid?
These are from underneath of the lid.
Hey, Rick, if you could mute your mic maybe, it might pick up a little bit better.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
What do you say, from under the lid? From under the lid.
There's no reason it can't be the top of the lid or under the lid. It doesn't, I don't think it matters. What matters is getting the hole the right size so that it fits perfectly.
Charlie, this is Chris again.
Yeah.
Just to go ahead and kind of fill you in on the idea, in case you want to try on the larger of the bowls, the larger one that you've got there.
Yeah.
So then my idea was some smaller medallion type sizes, and then think about instead of where you've got that lid that lifts off,
Yeah.
you've got the larger circumference of the top angled piece of the bowl. So imagine 3 small medallions then inset 120 degrees around that. That's the idea.
Yeah. So I think what Chris is saying is that we put some medallions around the outside circle here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the exact idea I'm thinking of.
Yeah. We'll work on that, Chris.
Chris, you're always one step ahead of everybody. I don't know how you do it.
Well, I've never done hollow turning, but on that piece right there, that's given me an idea of how to do a hollow turning without it actually being done by hollow turning.
Right. These were 2 separate pieces.
Okay.
Uh,
So you did like the top.
a top and a bottom, and the black. I happen to have the black walnut ring around the outside here is actually a segmented piece that I had laying around in the shop for several years. It was hanging on the wall, and I was trying to come up with a way of putting the black walnut. I looked at that, and I cut it in half on the bandsaw and run it through the drum sander and put it in here. I made 2 of these. I got another one at home that's exactly like it.
So you did those as each of the half, top and bottom of the halves.
Yep.
Which you did it just like a regular bowl, but
Yep.
then you just inverted them and put them together.
Yep.
That's okay. I guess, see, this time you're a step ahead of me. You already did what I was thinking of.
Yeah. I have done some of these hollow forms that are the same shape as this out of a single piece of wood. And basically I've got one of those easy wood hollowing tools with the hook on the end of it. They work good. The carbide blades don't last quite as long as they tell you. But you can sharpen them.
I find that once you do sharpen them, they don't really,
You never get them,
they go twice as fast.
yeah. But I sharpen them, I just take a diamond card and I just
Yeah, just flat.
flat on the diamond card.
A little lapping of fluid.
You could do that, yeah, it might not hurt.